All right, let's get started. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Summer Parikh on behalf of Hayes, and I will be your moderator for this panel discussion. I want to thank everyone for joining. By the end of this discussion, you should have a few easy to implement takeaways that will immediately add value and reduce risk to your company. Before I pass it off to our panelists for some brief introductions, I would like to go over some quick housekeeping items. This webinar will be approximately 45 minutes, with the last 10 minutes being reserved for a Q&A session. If you have a question, feel free to use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your application window. All you have to do is click the button with 3 dots and hover up and click the QA function. Please be sure to direct all your questions to my partner, Miguel Duran, who will be curating questions for the end of the discussion. This session is being recorded and will be made available on demand on our website, hayes.com. Without further ado, let's begin by introducing our panelists. Bobby, how about we start with you?
Hello, everybody. My name is Bobby Bookstaver. I am the Director of Information Security at Shawmut Design and Construction. For those of you who aren't familiar with Shawmut, we are a $1.5 billion construction management firm with 10 offices nationwide, including Boston, New York, and Los Angeles. I have been with Shawmut for a little over 4 years. I've been doing information security for over 37 years and have spent the bulk of my tenure in financial services and insurance companies such as Fidelity Investments, State Street Corporation, and MIB.
Wonderful. Joe, how about you?
Yes, hello. My name is Joseph Rigazio, and I'm one of the owners of Taliesin Construction. I am the CEO. Taliesin is 10 years in the making. We are in the New York metro area. Our office is right around the corner from Penn Station. We have about 50 people in the organization. We do anywhere from 50 to 75 projects a year.
Great, thank you. Jesse? You're on mute, Jesse.
Solved. Good afternoon. My name is Jesse Hillman. I'm Vice President of Security and Compliance for Lightbox. Lightbox is a commercial real estate, construction, and geoservices firm headquartered in Shelton, Connecticut, with offices in Canada, California, Washington, Chicago, and New York. I have about 28 years of experience in IT, ranging from CIO, CISO, and I was, previous to this role, a partner with a consulting firm where we delivered strategic IT security transformation consulting. That's about it.
Thank you. And last but certainly not least, Sanjay.
Thanks, Amar. So I'm Sanjay Parikh. I'm the VP of Professional Services at Critical Start. Critical Start is the largest security provider in the TOLA area, and we're now expanded nationally for the last year. Critical Start offers a lot of professional services, and we offer our MDR solution, which is Manage, Detect, and Respond. I spend a lot of time providing guidance and solutions for my customers and helping the organizations navigate their complex regulations, requirements, board and public expectations. And I've had a lot of experience in over my 25 years and held many different positions to help them understand what the different barriers and obstacles in implementing a good security program would be. Thanks, Samar.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay, so our first main topic is, what are the biggest cybersecurity threats to the construction industry? Bobby, let's start with your thoughts.
Sure, thank you very much. Well, I would say the biggest threat is coming through the phishing in the emails. So years ago, phishing would just be a basic email. It may be very easy to discern that it was not an attempt to compromise the business environment. These days, they've gotten very sophisticated. They do a lot of social engineering. They know what kind of business you're in. They may have even compromised one of your business partners. So by merely clicking on a link or an attachment that is malicious, you may download malware. That malware may compromise your credentials, and then the email that goes out to your business partners comes through looking as valid. So one of the concerns is not just that our employees would be clicking on a link or an attachment and infecting us, but that we are getting communications from our business partners that appear valid but actually contain malicious content.
Great.
You know, I'd like to add to that because I have a experience with that. A little embarrassing for one of the heads of our project accounting because he was a new employee. It was during the holidays and he was calm. Someone was communicating and posturing me. I was on the other side of the office, all the way to the point with American Express, and the money's transferred. Because he said yes to it and gave the information, he thought he was speaking to me. So it was when then the next day he came to me and looked at me and he said, "Oh, I followed up on X, Y, Z." And I said, "What are you talking about?" That's when he turned white and we realized that the crook got away with about $10,000. And the credit card company would not support it because we said yes. It's an interesting one, and that's the con job.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. Sanjay, care to comment?
Yeah, so we talk about phishing, and it is absolutely a concern for the construction industry, and it's also, but you also have to understand, what are they after? So when you click on a link and they download the malware, they're after a lot of different things. They're after either sensitive information such as user IDs and passwords. Why? They can use that information to log on to not only your company's portals or information, but they can also use it as they attack other companies. If I find one password, I can put that in my database and use that. Maybe somebody else is using that, or maybe you're using that in your personal banking portals. So I can take that. They may be also after an accountant's connections or contacts with their bank. So maybe they'll, like Bobby said, they'll be sending emails and saying, "Hey, we just changed our banking route information," and they'll send it to the accounting department. Also, now you're changing your accounting information and sending them their money. Or like Joseph said, is they're after people that are not necessarily technology savvy, so that they can say, "Hey, can you go buy these gift cards and send me the numbers, and I'm doing this as the CEO." And then one other reason is they're looking to put ransomware in your network. If they could put ransomware on your network, they can basically brick or halt you from doing work, and then they can sit there and send an email and say, "Hey, if you don't pay me this information, you're going to have to go through your disaster recovery, or you're going to be out of business." And so you have to understand what your risks are to your environment by what is your footprint. And we can go into that a little bit later with some other questions or comments that we'll dive into.
One other area from a construction standpoint, right? Phishing, the con job, ransomware, locking you up. Getting inside and stealing, there's content and then there's contact information. So some of the things that keep me up at night is, they got in, now they're looking for banking records, and they're looking through the workflow of your payable and receivable chain. Where are those wired informations, ACHs, EIN numbers of our vendors, et cetera, et cetera. That's concerning. That's on one side. That's, get the money. What about the professional drawings and plans? We have a lot of content that if we're dealing with more sensitive clients, that information, let's say banking clients, we know where the safe is, where we know the structure of the walls, we know how to get underneath them, right? They're all in drawings. What happens if you're working for even more government officials, right? Construction companies have gotten digital in the last 10 years. So there's a lot of documentation in our files that show how those buildings were built. So something to think about.
No, that's an excellent point, Joseph. I mean, people don't understand their footprint, and for where attackers are looking at it. Now with the COVID environment, you've expanded your footprint because now you're expecting all your workers or the majority of your workers to be working from home. So if they're working from home, the question was the business ready for this type of situation? So did they have laptops that they could provide their workers? If not, are they allowing the personal workstations from their workers because they could be possibly on an insecure configuration? The home network could be insecure. You could have kids that are working, that have computers on that network, and if they go to sites and download malware, that could be theoretically connected to you, and then you can connect to the corporate network. What are your users doing? Are they using cloud applications? Are they downloading your blueprints or data into the cloud environment so that it's easier to perform work? Are they downloaded on their laptops? Is it encrypted on their laptops? You know, all these type of questions. And it's not to scare people to say, oh, we have all these vulnerabilities. It's more to understand what your risks are and what your processes for mitigating those risks within your environment.
I agree. I like to actually bring it up to a higher level, and I like to take a look at the threats. The point of introduction into your company is either through the email or through the laptop or whatever that endpoint is, and how that employee is using that device and communicating. Because if you can choke those 2 points, you can deal with more of the risk of the data, what kind of data, is the risk the disclosure of the data or the integrity if it's manipulated. But if you bring it up to a higher level and you focus on the email-based threat, which is the phishing, as well as the laptop or browser-based, what are they doing with that device? It makes it a little bit easier to wrap your hands around what you're trying to mitigate.
That's a great transition, Bobby, to even taking that down to the next level, which is when you have small to mid-sized organizations, oftentimes those small to mid-sized organizations don't have large technology budgets, and those technology budgets are stretched. So maybe we get a director who is an aspiring manager, who may have expertise in infrastructure but not application security or communication security. We end up with technology deployed, which might be small business or home-based equipment versus real professional IT gear, firewalls, routers, switches, et cetera. And because we don't have that expertise across the board, people tend to be a mile wide and a quarter-inch deep in their expertise. So common problems include the password to the router never being reset from admin password. And hackers know this, and they exploit that first. That is the first thing they go looking for on a network. They sniff out IP addresses. They're looking for those given vulnerabilities that allow them unfettered access into the environment. Long before anybody even bothers with a phishing email, they probe that network. So that's a primary area. Secondary area is because you typically, when a smaller organization, and when I say small, 50, 100 employees and less, they typically end up with kind of a hodgepodge of equipment, which means there's just no physical way you're going to manage configurations across 20 different laptops, desktops, et cetera. It's just not possible. As corporations get bigger, they standardize on equipment, they standardize on desktop images, they push out images and updates to antivirus software, email. Zoom is a great example. You know, there's been half a dozen releases in the last 2 weeks to Zoom because of exploited vulnerabilities in a free video conferencing software package. So knowing what we don't know and knowing when to bring people like Sanjay and his team in to help us identify what risks we have, when our team can handle it and hand it off from those guys, and building those risk awareness programs and training your employees to be aware. That's kind of the nut for small businesses.
You know, Jesse, your comments, and I kind of fit right in that model, that 50 employee volume of people that have access to, I could say pre-COVID,
Yep.
BC, let's call it, before COVID, because I came from a very large company and I understood guys like you that I'd have to walk into rooms and you'd ask me 1,000 questions about the major department I used to run.
Yep.
Today, what I did in the last 10 years is we had VPN technology day one, but myself and the other owner only were allowed to use the VPN because I understood the fact that I had security protected in my domain.
Mm-hmm.
And we then went to cloud-based things, whether it's Exchange or other application software for the productivity of the folks outside of the domain. Half my organization, BC, could not come into my domain because I knew enough, the very wide but not deep knowledge. I knew enough that I can't allow that. There's too much vulnerability. That was BC. I have the 25 people that are in my, used to be in this office. I look across it right now, there's only one other. I have 23 people over the course of 2 weeks that we had to go forward and release VPNs. And now I sit here and say, oh my God, I just opened up the doorways from the home router to the smart TV to the, oh my God, the IoT of the world today connected to the home network has the VPN into now my domain from the 16-year-old kid that has no clue. Now they're talking to Alexa, right? Alexa, now you can verbally get into my domain. And that's what's scaring me today. That's where I am right now.
And again, I think Sanjay would be happy to come sit down with you and help you build a network that would have segmentation so that when your employees come in, they only have access to those areas by policy or by control at the network level. And this is, again, this is where the small and medium business may not have that expertise. You know, you may have somebody who can connect some computers together, they can connect a router, they may be able to even stand up a rudimentary VPN solution. But that doesn't mean that you're secure, even if it's behind a firewall, because with Office 365 in the cloud, with pick your ERP, Microsoft, Oracle, they're all in the cloud today. How do you manage the users who have access to those clouds and keep their credentials from being compromised by a hacker? You know, multi-factor authentication, email encryption. I just wrapped up a problem where somebody using phishing violated somebody's credentials, got into their email, changed their password, set business rules in their email account that basically says anybody looking for hacking goes to the garbage. Anything that looks like they're searching for something that's email hacking, go to the garbage. They were in that account for over 90 days. So when you think about what's in your email, well, I don't get much personal email. Well, what did you send? Think about everything in your sent box, all those attachments. So what you call at-rest encryption becomes extremely valuable, because if I encrypt it and send it and it's at rest, anything in my inbox or my sent box is encrypted. And even if it's compromised, the best you can do is get to an encrypted email. So these are things, go ahead, Bobby, I'm sorry.
Actually, if your email account gets compromised, they're in your email accounts. So they're looking like you. So they're seeing, it's a huge risk. They're actually seeing.
Not if you're using a multi-factor key account where you have keys in 2 locations.
Well, multi-factor authentication would solve the problem of them ever getting
in, that's correct.
If you don't have it, they can compromise the credentials, and once they're in, they can actually see the emails that go between you and a business partner, And this is where many companies have suffered diverted payments. So they see the communication going between a GC or a subcontractor or a CM, talking about invoices or money movement, and they jump in, set up a different company that looks very similar, and then suggest that they're under audit and the payments need to go someplace else.
Sure.
So the fish is what allows the compromised credential. Once they're in your account, it's
I would agree that preventing them from getting in, the MFA is probably the single most important layer.
Yes.
But again, the encryption is where, in the event somebody gets a hold of the email and is able to get in, and it doesn't have to be on your machine. It can be in the O365 cloud. It can be on a physical Exchange server. There's a lot of ways to gain access outside of an Outlook email box, if you will, which is where the encryption comes in. The other thing is an encrypted email can't be spoofed because only the intended receiver gets the key. And the keys reside hypothetically in multiple places. But we don't need to get into that. It's probably deeper than the small and medium businesses are going to deal with. However, these are things they should be thinking about and engaging companies like Sanjay's.
You know, we're always thinking about that, and it's interesting what level of technical protection we need to layer in, try to keep ahead of the bad guys, and depending on how much of a target you are, the bigger your target, usually your balance sheet is strong enough that you can hire the Bobbies and the Jessies and the Sanjays, and you could put layer upon layer of protection. You know, at the end of the day, education for all the employees, and maybe again, just because of how fast organizations have went from a paper world where they would stamp approval on the paper document, approve to pay, put it in the inbox on the other side of the office. Now that goes to the next person and whatnot. That's how 90% of our construction companies operate. That's at a sophisticated GC level. Go down to your trades, and I still have some with faxes, believe it or not, although T3 protocol is probably more secure than anything else these days. But if you think about those things, at the end, it's someone got duped. I have all the information now, and now I'm acting like you. And because now think of the workflow. And again, it's the workflow that I'm thinking that just changed in the last 30 days. Workflows had to change for the predominant amount of people that went from working in the office to working at home. The 30 days to 45 days into it, and they think they're heroes because, oh my God, we can operate now. Because what they're doing is they went from 5 emails a day to 150 emails a day with 1,000 attachments to try to show a physical to digital, and they think they're in a digital world, but they're just changed what they did, and the amount of information that's out exposed
Is risk
on
to the nth degree.
it went to the nth degree. So here I am thinking about, hey, Mr. Employee, do you have a password on your router? Because when I walk my dog and I have my phone open, out of the 50, there's probably 5 that I can get into because they don't even have a password on their router.
Mm-hmm.
Now they have a VPN access to my network.
I think
I'm in the hyperventilating stage to say there's a lot that we have to put in place in both education and security. Otherwise, I got to get them all back into my office fast.
so. I'm going to put a shameless plug in for a company that we just contracted with, and they operate as a cloud. It's called KnowBe4. I'm sure, Sanjay, you've dealt with those guys or heard of them. They do a streaming online educational program for cybersecurity for employers. They also have tools where you can actually send fake phishing emails to your employees, and then it tracks who clicked on it and if they have recently received training, and that tags them for, they need to repeat the training because clearly they weren't paying attention. et cetera. And this walks through the whole spectrum of cybersecurity, spear phishing, phishing, social engineering, all of the things that got your guy, social engineering. Hi, this is Joe, I need you to call Amex and send a payment. The, employee education awareness is 90% of the game.
Yeah.
I send out.
We're going to get into some of the things companies can do to mitigate these risks.
Yep.
One area that I did want to touch on was business partner risk. Bobby, do you want to talk a little bit about business partner risk?
Sure. So one of the things that seems to be on the rise these days, like we've been talking about, the people you deal with have all different levels of sophistication of technology, knowledge, and expertise. So if somebody you're doing business with has one employee who clicks on the link and attachment, and the malware grabs their ID and password, and they're not using the multiple factors for authentication, and their account gets hacked. So like we were just talking about, the hacker sits in the email account, hacker monitors emails that go between your company and that subcontractor, that business partner. The hacker sees something juicy. The hacker now reaches out to you. These are most often seen for live projects. Years ago, it used to be for projects that hadn't been open in 5 years. And you'd say, oh, we haven't done business with them for a while. But these are now seen for live projects. So you have an employee in your company who gets an email from a business partner that they're currently working with that says, here's the new proposal, here's the revised proposal, click here. And by clicking, your employee who believed they were communicating with that trusted business partner now has brought malware into your company. And that malware can be in the form of trying to get compromised credentials or encrypt the files on the file server, or take a look at some of the proprietary data. So the biggest threat with all the awareness training that you can do is that email that's coming from your business partner that is truly a phish, but it's coming through as authentic. It's passing all the technology controls that you may have in place. It's passing the awareness. The best you can hope for is the employee says, I was not expecting something from that person, or they don't normally deliver it in a OneDrive or a Google Doc. It's getting very sophisticated. But I agree, Jesse, that the awareness is crucial to be able to get your employees to understand what should a valid email look like and what does an invalid one, whether it's the sender's name is off or the method of delivery of a file is off. But that's one of the biggest threats out there are the emails coming from the business partners that the business
and the layer on that, Bobby, things like email filtering, like Proofpoint, where if I send an email, and I've done it occasionally from my home office without realizing it, because I have 5 email accounts on my Outlook at home. I teach in the evenings as an adjunct professor, so I have an email account for school. I have one for work. I have one for personal. And if I don't carefully select which email, it could go out with the wrong signature block versus the email. A company like Proofpoint scans that email and says, wait a minute, this guy, Jesse Hillman over here from Lightbox is using a jesse.hillman@xdomain.com. Why do they not match? And it will sequester that email into a holding area and send you an email and say, this is suspicious. And this is something that, the cost of these solutions are typically cloud-based, they're per user, they're inexpensive in the big scheme compared to the risk of loss. And data is money. I don't care if it's plans, if it's your competitors. Hackers will get your plans or your bids or your quotes, and they'll go to your competitors and try to sell them that as a competitive advantage. These guys are ruthless. They don't care.
Yeah, yeah. And
that's inside the field or that's dirty playing, boy.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh my goodness.
Sanjay, some of our members, right, in the audience, they might understand the importance of a cybersecurity strategy, but they might struggle with helping their CEO understand the risk versus the reward. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Absolutely. So, I mean, it was interesting. I was kind of actually thinking about that as we were talking about all these different concerns in the cyber security or the cyber industry. This is scary from the standpoint if you're just sitting back listening to all the potential ways that somebody can affect your network or affect your business. And what do I have? And oh my God, I have to go and resolve all these things. But CEOs and boards are not looking at it from that perspective. Companies need to understand, or people need to understand, that companies' first priority is revenue, period. If they're not in business from a revenue standpoint, it doesn't, all these different controls will not matter, especially at this time in the COVID environment where revenue is so hard to obtain. So when they sit there, and when you sit there from an IT perspective and sit there and ask for money to sit there and put an antivirus or put awareness or address phishing, they're going to sit there and understand it, try to figure out, is that as important as this process to go get more revenue? And you have to be able to explain to them how it either will get you more revenue or how it'll detract from revenue. And so you have to be able to speak in those business terms. So when we talk about phishing and the ability to affect either your financials, that would affect money going out, affect somebody else's, like a partner affecting you, that would affect your revenue. If we talk about third-party agreements, if you don't do your due diligence, especially as you become a bigger company, most companies perform some sort of due diligence by asking questions such as, do you have policies in place? Do you have an endpoint protection? Do you have an annual assessment of your controls? Do you have a penetration test performed? And if they don't answer in an appropriate manner, then they won't go forward with that partnership. And so you're costing yourself revenue or work with other parties to gain those, sort of integration. And so this is how you talk to your senior execs to help them understand how these cyber issues really does affect their business from a revenue perspective.
Sure, and to add to that, Sanjay, being able to clearly articulate what the cost of your data is, what the value of your data is, what insurance programs you may or may not have, and then what those potential business unavailability periods would cost you. If I were to come into your organization and lock your data today, how long would it take your IT organization to restore that data from a backup or a DR solution? If that's a day or two and you're running at a run rate of $1 million a day on a project and you can't have your project managers getting access to blueprints or specs or whatever the case may be, that's $1 million a day. How much is it worth to then bring somebody like Sanjay to the table to help you design that cyber strategy?
Yeah.
I think when it comes to presenting it to management, it comes down, you need to talk the business language and you need to talk about risk.
Yep.
So we tend to get very caught up in technology being the silver bullet, that if you had the latest antivirus, this may solve your problem. But it's not about the specific solution, it's about the risk to the business. And the risk is the confidentiality, so whether it is contract-driven or regulatory-driven or management-driven, or there is no confidentiality issue, or integrity. What if you could not rely on the accuracy or the integrity of the data? And then the last thing would be the availability. So whether it's encrypted and you can't get to it, or somebody had too much authority and deleted it, or the hacker, but you've got to be able to present the risk to the business. So that's really, you may not be able to quantify from a dollar perspective, but if you can explain what the risk is.
Well, and the risk is also, there's a tipping point in equating risk versus protection and security. I can protect 100% of my environment for $100 million. Okay, well, my risk is only $20 million. So do I really need to spend $100 million to protect 20? Probably not, right? So understanding that risk versus cost model first, and
Correct.
second is helping to define where those, as you were saying, where those risks lie and how we protect those primary risk areas. Finance, accounting, ERP, email, very, very high. And these aren't technology in all cases. Sometimes it's just awareness and common sense. So what's the risk versus reward? And that's always the payoff.
Right.
That's always
And the risk and their ability to do business, because I can protect a company from a security, IT, cybersecurity issue 100% by unplugging all the computers.
Sure.
You just can't use a computer. But now you can't use a computer. So what is that risk to the company, and how does that affect your revenue and your ability to do business, right? So now you have to do a balance of explaining what the risk of the technology is versus what the risk of the business and the processes, and then come to an agreement of what you can accept and what you can't. And
Let's segue to COVID-19, right? Has this pandemic added to the current challenges?
Yeah.
I don't think it has added to the challenges. I just think it has highlighted some of the deficiencies that we've had, such as the phishing and the awareness and the remote connections and the multi-factor authentication, and some of the pieces that my esteemed panelists have brought up as well.
Well, I think as much as the security issues have been highlighted, there's also the challenges around the use of technology. There are employees who casually use technology, and there are employees who actively use technology on a daily basis. I don't want to mention anybody's name, but his name is our CEO, has challenges with technology, not because he's a neophyte, just because he's typically got an admin who works through his emails for him and determines which ones are priority for him, et cetera. So that makes him, when he's sitting at his home office in front of his MacBook, which is another challenge in our enterprise to deal with because it doesn't always mesh well with a Windows-dominated network. So now we've got two exposures. One is somebody who's not typically used to answering his or responding to or filtering his own email, and he's on a platform that may or may not be fully supported in our security domain. So I think that casual user approach to technology is what COVID has really put a spotlight on, in addition to the fundamentals that Sanjay highlighted, the VPN,
I think we'll let Bobby get in a comment real fast, and then just to be mindful of time, I think we should move to the next topic. But I know, Bobby, you had something that you wanted to say. Please go ahead.
What I was going to say was, I think it did add to it because we took an environment that was, for good or for bad, was stable and people were used to it, and we moved it to the house or to the home where they may not have a lot of the similar controls. So something as basic as a dual control, two people need to do something, is more difficult when they're physically separated. Some of the necessary controls just won't work from the house anymore. You can't control who's printing what. The other thing is you may have changes in staff. So if you have a job site that's shut down, you have taken those people who are on that job and maybe you've repurposed them to another type of a job. A superintendent may be doing work on another job, and it may be substantially different from the work or the role that he had on the job site he was on, if that job site was closed. So they're not familiar with what they're doing. Hence, they may not know all the controls that need to be in place. So I do think the pandemic itself and having everybody immediately go home and change, their job, the way they performed, has affected the security.
Good point.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. So the next piece of our segment is, what steps would you advise taking to mitigate these risks? Bobby, how about you start?
Well, once again, I agree with Sanjay that assessments are really important. I think you need to pick the common denominator in your company. So you may not have the luxury of doing some of the more sophisticated assessments, such as a penetration test, but even going and taking a look at your email system and digging into it and take a look at the configuration settings that you have available to you. Is there something in your Microsoft Office 365 or your Outlook or whatever you're using that is a feature that you can enable to give you more security, such as multi-factor? These are low-cost alternatives because you already own the technology. It's just a matter of having somebody take a look at what the settings are and whether there's anything more you can enable to protect yourself.
Great. Sanjay?
You know, I wanted to add just one or two things that even through this panel, it has me thinking harder. And it was originally on employee education, and it's still there, and it's employee education. Be careful about the con. It's not employee education. Let me teach you about technology. It's employee education. Did you change your password every 90 days? Do you have a password on your router? Watch out for the con. Text the individual besides the email. Maybe there's a workflow. We talk about technology having multi-point authentication. We can educate our employees. Listen, before I hit this button on the wire, let me call you with another phone number. You know, like we used to do that years ago. I remember there was a protocol when there were major movements of funds, when you ran a P&L for a large corporation. You actually had to have multiple steps the old way. It was authenticating, not technology. It was people doing it. So I sit here and say, what am I going to do? I may go BC, really BC. And getting all my 25 to 30 employees, anytime there's a transfer of any fund, commitment, or anything, where's your old school authentication? Just a thought.
No, those are good points, Joseph. So, I mean, some low-cost alternatives are the awareness, and it's so that's one solution or remedy. When Joseph is right, so we're not talking about just giving them information. We're trying to expand their understanding of how an attacker will sit there and come at them, whether it be through an email or trying to feign their information to try and get information. Also, it's their, you know, in this time, it's also the use of video. Most people with video is fine, but some people, you know, as you've seen in these different YouTubes, they don't know how to use video. One person got caught going to the bathroom with their video still on and didn't know that they were still on. One person sits there and sits down in front of their desk and doesn't look behind them, and they have sensitive information. Maybe you have an HR person sitting there going through performance reviews, and all of a sudden she gets on a video, and now you're able to see all the documents on, you know, on her desk. People have to be aware of what they're doing and how they're using their technology. Another good low-cost alternative is policies and procedures. So you document and you put together a process that is specific, and everybody is doing it in the same manner. Why? Because at least if you catch people that the process is incorrect, then you can redirect them all at one time in an easy, quick manner, as opposed to individually all across. So depending on how big your organization, and also it tells them what the right process, so that if somebody else comes in and says, I want to do X, but yet the process is Y, they can hopefully understand to ask that question. When you go from there, then you start getting into technologies or solutions that cost money, but you still want to look at these type of remedies in order to secure your different footprint. So Bobby talked about multi-factor authentication. Jesse talked about encryption of your data. We talked about if you can do a penetration test on your system. Penetration test will let you know where your vulnerabilities are on your systems. But what I would tell you, if you are going to be lax in all of these areas, such as the multi-factor, such as the encryption, such as the penetration test, you need to really be looking at some sort of manage, detect, and respond. Why? Because even though it sounds like Critical Start has one, but pick another MDR provider out there. It doesn't matter. The reason being is because they're watching your hen house. If an alert comes in and they're good at what they do, then they can sit there and react on that alert almost immediately so that they can isolate ransomware from going within your environment, or they can sit there and stop or block a document, a sensitive document from going somewhere. So the ability, if you're not gonna watch your hen house, then let somebody else do that. And there are some low-cost alternatives out there. And then the last piece is making sure you have some sort of incident response so that something like this, the pandemic, so that you can react quickly and effectively as opposed to everybody running around and not knowing what to do. So those are just some opportunities that people can use within their organizations to help them be a little bit more secure.
I would add to what Sanjay was just saying and say, as you look at your response to this COVID-19 pandemic that we've had to address, in looking at all of the changes you've executed in your organization, you've basically executed on a business continuity plan, is what you've done. You have said, business as usual used to be this way, but we have to push all of our employees out of the office and send them home. And now we have to provide some form of remote access for them to continue doing their jobs if they use technology, or if technology is how they conduct their jobs. Take the opportunity to document that. Take the opportunity to do the gap analysis of how did we do it before, how are we doing it now, and is there an opportunity to streamline or enhance my business, and how do I make sure that these changes and that the critical players that we identified in this are identified, documented, and recognized, as well as we maintain it going forward. So if so-and-so is our documented person who is the person who's going to manage our VPN solution so that all of our employees can get in, and that person leaves the organization, who's his backup? And who has been trained on that VPN solution so that they can add new users, delete old users? You know, just like a business disaster recovery and continuity plan, you maintain it and you test it every year or every quarter. And you should take this opportunity to apply those lessons learned and document them so that, God forbid, we go through this again in the fall, or there's an earthquake or a hurricane or a pick your flavor, you're prepared. Don't let this disaster go to waste from the perspective of building value for your business.
We talked a little bit about business partner risk, right? What advice can we give the audience, on how to mitigate that risk?
I would start with encryption in critical communications. You don't have to have the person receiving an encrypted email be on your system. You can send them a key. Your investment in that encryption protects any data you're sending to them or that they're sending back to you via that encrypted email with keys, public keys on both ends. That is probably the single least expensive and largest return on partner safety, in addition to, of course, the training and the various other things you could do with your employees. Sanjay, what would you say?
I mean, that's a big topic that you can, but you have to look at all the different touch points that you have with that third party, such as if you're going to have a B2B connection, how you're going to share data, how you're going to collaborate. But even before that, when you're selecting your third party, is understanding what your contractual liabilities and requirements are. Are you putting those requirements into the contract? Are you doing your due diligence by understanding what you are getting into bed with from the standpoint of what type of controls? How do they look at security? Are they that one-person shop that doesn't really look at security very well, or are they a well-organized and take security very as important? So you have to do your due diligence and understand where your touch points are, and then help mitigate the risk from those touch points.
Sure.
I agree. I think it also comes down to whether we're talking service providers who are doing something on your behalf. There's an awful lot of requirements around that and how that data is secured, as opposed to the business partner who may be an architect or a subcontractor. and really understanding their business model and that there may be gaps compared to yours, and how to protect yourself. In the end, it's about protecting your business model and your data. So if you're not sure that their email communications are valid, teach your employees to call the person, not to reply to the email.
Yep. I send out regular emails every 2 weeks, and I tell people, you know, verify. And if you're not sure, go look up that contact person. Don't respond to the email. Don't dial any phone numbers that are on that email. Go to your directory on your email or in your phone and call that person. Verify that they sent that email.
Yeah. So I want to highlight a couple of takeaways, right, and calls to action, and then we can segue into our Q&A portion. So a couple of things that I've heard that I think are important, easy to implement, and cheap. The first one would be to look at your password policies, right? It should be 10 digits with numbers, special characters, lowercase, uppercase, and make sure you're on a program where you're updating that every 30, 60, or 90 days, right? And then some level of security awareness training and phishing training goes a long way. Anything else that we want to add as a key takeaway, a call to action for people in the audience?
Yeah, I would say the multi-factor authentication. If you're utilizing Office 365 or any of the Microsoft Cloud, they offer that as a part of your subscription. It's relatively easy to implement, and it virtually eliminates the need for changing those passwords every 30 to 60, 90 days, because you're effectively getting a triangulation of validation on every login.
Okay. All right, let's move to this Q&A. We do have quite a few questions here. The first one here is basically asking, do you, the panelists, think layer 8, in parentheses, the human vulnerability aspect, is one of the biggest risks to the construction industry?
Yes.
I don't think it's constrained to the construction industry.
Yes.
Well, but as compared to financial services, where they've done an awful lot years ago in making people aware, I think construction is fairly new into awareness.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree.
Okay. Second question here is for Sanjay. What services does Critical Start provide that may be a potential solution that SMB construction businesses may be able to look into?
So part of those services would be basically a small assessment where we would come in and understand your footprint, technology, policies, processes, people, and your business, and then be able to understand what you have, and then help you design basically a roadmap, for lack of a better word, to match basically your risk. And so making that useful for you from a value standpoint, so that it is effective. And then it is not one of those services that we just come in and perform that and then give it to you and then say bye. We'll sit there and work with you to make sure it's implemented, check up on you, see if you have any questions, and making sure that you're getting the most out of your assessment.
Great, thank you. This question is for Bobby.
Mm-hmm.
If you were going to give one piece of advice to a company with no security footprint in their construction business, what would you say to them?
Awareness. Well, then two. One would be the employee awareness, that you've got to reach these people. This is all new to them, this whole world of phishing, the idea that emails look valid, but they're not. They need to understand that they have to be suspicious of everything and assume it's all bad. And the other would be, even with a small number of people in your organization, if you could take a look at whatever technology you have and see if there's anything you can do to improve it at no cost. So if you have somebody who's managing your local area network, they will be familiar with how to take a look at some of those features. If you have people who are managing desktops, if you have somebody who consults with your users on how to connect to the network, take a look at what you already have because chances are you can improve your security just by changing some of the configuration settings.
Great.
Good point.
This next question is, just one second here. To what extent are we helping attackers by providing out-of-office replies to emails, providing contact information on websites, PR announcements, and LinkedIn posts?
I don't think out of office really matters. But they do go through LinkedIn. You know, they use that to find out if they are targeting an attack on your finance people. But I think they do so much research to say that we're helping them because we post a job that we're working on. That's just one piece of what they do, if they're really targeting you. I think putting your executives' names on your website with their email addresses is a huge no-no. That's the easiest place they can get the information to do what's called that business email compromise, where it looks like it's coming from the CEO.
So the use of social media has definitely increased the ability for me as an attacker to get more information around you. So we see this in a lot when I'm in a company and we're doing penetration. We see this if we understand certain employees that work at this company. I can go look them up on Facebook, and what will I see? I will see them answer random questions such as, what is your favorite pet? You know, we all go through and get those, you know, what's your favorite color? What's your favorite, pet? What's your name of your goldfish, or, you know, whatever those questions are. And I can find out so much information from that as far as so I can target them from a phishing standpoint and to get that information. And that's really what the intent is of getting all that sensitive information.
Great. Any final comments here? All right.
Well, I think that people need to understand their environment and then understand their risk. So they understand where their data is and what data is and what risk to the company is IT affected company. I think with how they can protect the company in general.
I think in addition to that, they also need the CEOs or presidents or owners. They need to sit down and they need to engage, whether it's an outside individual, a peer that has invested in a little more robust IT and security infrastructure, and they need to develop a strategy for the organization that at the very rudimentary level addresses the primary concerns, and then they have something to build from. Awareness is 99% of it. You know, it just pretending it isn't going to happen to you because you're small is not the solution. It's an invitation.
I would also say, regardless of whether you're a very small company or a larger company such as mine, this is serious. It takes only one person to click, and whether you're big or small, that one person clicking can introduce the malware and can harm your company. So it needs to be taken seriously. Your employees need to understand that you value them, but you value their security awareness also.
Yes, thanks, Bobby. And on that note, just to wrap up here, if you do have any questions, right, if you're looking for any services, we're happy to provide Sanjay's information. If you have any needs from a recruitment perspective, I've got my partner's email addresses here. Please feel free to reach out. I want to thank everyone for joining, everyone in the audience, our panelists. Thank you so much. We hope that everyone saw a little bit of value here, and we wish you well. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So, thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.